Well, thank you, Joy, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here with you today. My name is Nicola Blackwood. I am Chair of Genomics England and a survivor of many years in politics and government, most recently as Life Sciences Minister. And I'm delighted to be here today with Sally Mossman. She is joining us today from Rockville, Maryland, where she heads GSK's Global Vaccine R&D Centre. Welcome, Sally. Now, Sally, this has been the most extraordinary time for vaccine development. I think there was probably a global sigh of relief, which could have been heard from space, when the news was coming out from Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca that we are really now starting to see some positive news coming out about the vaccine, and there's the potential for us to start returning to normal life. And you have been right at the heart of this. I really can't imagine what it has been like living through this at the coalface. As a true believer in the power of life sciences to transform the health of nations, I think one of the most positive aspects of this whole extraordinary experience has been the deep international collaboration between governments and health systems and researchers and pharma. But I don't think watching it is anything like experiencing it. So can you just give us a little bit of an idea of what you have been up to and what it has really felt like to be on the front line?
Hello, Nicola. Thank you. Yes, delighted to be here. No, it has been an extraordinary time, as you say, and I think I couldn't agree with you more that this collective sigh of relief around the success of Moderna and AZ, etc., in terms of the efficacy that they've demonstrated on these vaccines. And I think, as an employee of GSK, a vaccine company, I think our position on this, we are very, very active in the COVID vaccine space, but we fully believe that it's going to take many vaccines to be successful to really tackle this global problem. And so, yes, as being on the front lines, indeed. So I'm head of an R&D facility here in Rockville, Maryland. And so we've really been juggling our efforts towards a COVID vaccine. We've been juggling running a facility where we have lab employees coming in all the time, of course, and so very concerned about being able to keep them safe. And at the same time, of course, as a commercial company, we need to keep the rest of the business going as well. So it's been an extremely busy time, an exhilarating time as well, though, as we see the incredible breakthroughs that are happening in terms of vaccine technologies, the accelerated pace of development. I think there will be some good things that come out of this pandemic in terms of what it means for vaccines. And I would say the increased scrutiny on vaccines as a really important public health measure.
Well, I mean, this is something. What has been extraordinary was the pace and scale with which vaccine development accelerated in order to respond to the challenge which we were facing. And obviously that wouldn't be possible if there wasn't already strong underlying systems in place in many nations. And so what is interesting to try and understand is, what do you think, as somebody who's on the delivery side, is important for, what are the important key elements for business to get right in order to stimulate innovation? What do you think governments need to get right in order to create the kind of ecosystem to stimulate the kind of discovery that is necessary to respond to these kind of crises when they emerge out of the blue?
Yeah, and I think we were able to respond so quickly to this situation because a lot of those underlying innovations were already there, both in terms of the vaccine technologies as well as some really basic research that had happened in terms of related viruses to COVID-19. So from a business side, I think what's key to innovation is really having the right culture within the company, and I think that has to come from the very top. It has to come from management. I think there needs to be a framework where innovation is recognized and rewarded. Ideas coming, of course, from our own scientists, but really critically external collaborations. And it's very often that interplay between, a university or a government-funded institute and our own scientists that can really stimulate innovation. Another key component that we think is really important is tolerating failure. So the encouraging of taking some smart risks. That's really important in terms of stimulating innovation within a company. And then the other thing I would note there is the funding. So we have to make sure that we're funding the early research work and not always prioritizing the allocation of the R&D investment into the more late stage programs. So I think within a company, that's what's really important for innovation, as well as understanding what problem you're trying to solve, right? So that you're kind of channeling the innovative ideas towards fixing problems. In this case, it was all around, how can it be easier to make and to research and develop vaccines and bring them to patients in a timely way. And this is where all of the innovation around the RNA technology and viral vector technologies. And from a government perspective, I think, partnership with governments has been key for many, many years in terms of stimulating innovation within vaccines businesses. And I think, there are policies in place like direct funding of R&D or stimulating those cooperative relationships between government-funded universities or in research institutes together with the private sector. Things like, tax credits for research and development, securing intellectual property rights for companies is absolutely key to make it a sustainable business model. So those are some of the things that I think really help in the interplay between industry and governments in terms of stimulating innovation.
So it's interesting, you spoke about risk tolerance there and the need for business to tolerate more risk within its portfolio. Now, governments are not well known for tolerating risk, but what has been interesting is the accelerated pace of development. And many people listening will want to know that the vaccine development has still proceeded with the appropriate level of safety and scrutiny over that development. And so when you're talking about risk in the vaccine development, can you just kind of define what you mean by that?
That's a great, yes, thank you. And risk, of course, I'm talking about the very, very early innovation, right? It's risk in terms of, perhaps trying something in the lab that may not be 100% sure to succeed. I'm not talking about risk in terms of execution of clinical trials. It's absolutely key. I think everybody agrees that patient safety is first and foremost the most important thing. And, and clinical trials are inherently designed to start with small numbers of subjects before going to larger numbers of subjects. And that approach has been maintained through COVID vaccine development. And of course, I think it's through very close and careful interaction with the regulators that we can do these types of things at pace, where regulators are able to maybe eliminate some of the more timely procedures without compromising patient safety.
Well, that's an important point, because if we have managed to eliminate some of the unnecessary bureaucracy in order to accelerate discovery in vaccines and get to phase 3 and possibly towards rollout during this period, what is it that we have learned about improving vaccine discovery during this COVID period that can perhaps be transferred into future vaccine discovery? Because this is not going to be the only pandemic challenge or outbreak challenge that we face. And also we have other priorities that we might want to move this learning into, whether it's a universal flu vaccine or the challenges of AMR. And we don't want to lose the extraordinary learnings that we've had in the last few months.
I think that's true, but I think it's important to recognize that not all of the shortcuts that were taken on COVID will necessarily be readily applied in, more traditional preventive vaccine development. And I think, here risk benefit is absolutely key, right? So in the current situation where it's imperative to go quickly, this is where, we were able to take, for example, do some toxicology studies in parallel with the phase 1 study based on a body of previously available clinical data suggesting minimal risk. So those are the types of decisions that could be taken between vaccine companies and regulators that allowed us to go faster. If we were coming with a completely new technology or a completely new approach, we obviously would not, there wouldn't be an appetite for taking that kind of risk. So I think it really does depend on the body of evidence available to allow that type of appropriate judgment call. But I couldn't agree with you more. I think there are many, many learnings from the way that we've been able to respond in the current situation that we need to hang on to and that we need to be able to apply moving forwards. And I would say, the development and validation of some of these technology platforms will absolutely transform vaccine development moving forwards. If I look at the shingles vaccine from GSK, Shingrix, that took 10 to 15 years to develop. And here we've seen COVID vaccines come from, first viral sequence to clinical efficacy data within a matter of months. That's absolutely incredible. And a big part of that is these technology platforms. Messenger RNA is a platform that is really simplifying the manufacturing approach. That we will keep, that the utilization of that technology, it truly is a plug and play platform. So we won't need to reinvent those processes every time around. It's really, I think, removing some of the barriers to entry that were previously in place due to the need to manufacture complex biologicals. So there's no question this will transform the vaccines business.
Well, this leads us on to, a really knotty question, really, about access. And obviously, we've just heard from Varun Mathur from the AI Now Institute talking about the questions of public-private partnerships in terms of development and how this leads to questions about value. And so in terms of ensuring that vaccines are distributed and financially accessible to all in order to ensure equity, what roles do you think all the different partners in vaccine development should be playing to make sure that we achieve that equity of access when what we're talking about is a life-saving product?
The mission of COVAX is to ensure, accelerated supply of vaccines and equitable access as well as affordable pricing for countries across the globe. And I think more than 180 nations have actually signed up to COVAX. GSK and Sanofi in our collaborative partnership have signed a letter of intent for support to COVAX, and we've actually committed 200 million doses of vaccine to enable, this equitable supply of vaccine across the globe. And I think, it's absolutely essential that governments are thinking not just about national infrastructure and national supply. We really need to be thinking about the global approach to addressing this pandemic, but also the next pandemic, because I think everybody believes this will not be the last one.
And we're coming to the end. We have a very short amount of time left. So you've mentioned some technological changes which have occurred in recent years, and really their value has been realized in response to this pandemic. You've mentioned some changes in terms of the way in which different partners have operated in response to this pandemic, with significantly more collaboration, both nationally and internationally. What do you think will be different in terms of vaccine development going forward? Are you optimistic? Do you think development will be faster? And do you think we are in a good position to respond to future threats?
While I think there will, from a long-term perspective, there will always be a need for competition between companies, because I think that's part of the sustainability of the model. It's also what often drives time to market and drives innovation. But in terms of future pandemic preparedness, I do think we need to be thinking global network, collaboration, funding to make this a sustainable approach where we can have kind of a warm infrastructure that is working for the most part on these mainstream vaccines, but that can rapidly pivot towards rapid response when the need arises. So am I optimistic? I'm optimistic that all the conditions are right to make it happen, but there needs to be a will to support it and to fund it. And there's a big role for governments in there as well.
Sally, thank you so much for your time. That's been an absolutely fascinating glimpse at the operation of building a vaccine that will save lives. Now we just have to make sure it's available for all. Thank you very much for your time.
Indeed.
And
My pleasure.
Joy.